We're so glad that you decided to tune into the Church Rehab podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Canady Enterprises. Don't forget to subscribe and follow the podcast so you can be notified each time a new episode drops. Enjoy the podcast with our host, Pastor Mechelle Canady of Embrace You Ministries. Hello and welcome to another episode of Church Rehab. I am Mechelle Canady, and we are back for part two of Church Rehab, the Preacher's Kids Experience, and we are talking about succession. So we're gonna pick back up where we left off. So we were talking about seeing your fathers go through pain. And one of the things that Leofric, you said was your grandfather was a preacher. So how far back does it go? The lineage of priests.
I'm I'm going to say is my grandfather. What? Not my He was my father's grandfather, but it's my great grandfather.
Got it.
So that's how far it goes back. For me, I didn't have the opportunity to meet my grandfather. I know he was not a pastor, but I know that my father stayed or lived in my grandmother's house and my great grandmother's house and my great grandfather's house during his adolescence. So that was basically his parents, if you
Mhm.
could say it. I'm not discounting my grandmother because she was present in their lives, but that was who he pretty much stayed with as he grew up. So that's who he saw as a role model. So yeah, so great grandfather is where it pretty much started.
What about you, Glenn?
It starts with my dad.
Oh
I,
wow.
yeah, I even have when we were actually looking through paperwork and end up finding like tons of sermons that he wrote. Man, my dad was ordained in I think like 1985. So I've been around in this world since 1985. But my dad actually, like I said, he started pastoring. He had done went through a couple of um, candidate churches that he didn't get, and the pastor at the time, Louis Naaman Yarbrough, told my father like, "Hey, I believe the Lord is calling you to preach, but I think He's calling you to plant a church." And that was 2003, no, '01, I believe, when he started Resurrection Baptist Church Christian Center, right on the back porch of my parents' home.
For me, I come from a lineage of women preachers. My mom and my auntie, back in the day, they would go around and they would do what we called in the Baptist church devotion.
Mhm.
And they called my mom and my auntie the good time sisters. They would come and uh lay it out for you. And so I didn't know my grandparents either. But the it was the women preachers. And for years, because I'm almost 50, so when I was coming up, women were not allowed to preach.
Mhm.
So I saw, especially my mom, um, kind of fight against the prick when it comes to what the call was on her life. Um, and there was a lot of struggles. And also, my mother in law is a pastor, and pre me and Cedric's relationship, I knew her. And I've been knowing her since I was a teenager. So I've also watched her kind of try to make a way in the church arena for women who the Lord has called to preacher, pastor. So that was a difficulty. But my mama, baby, my mama would pray a prayer and send heaven down. Yeah. So I come from women pastors. I know, and it's funny because when we started our ministry 2 years ago, it was me who the Lord called to the role of lead pastor. At the time, my husband hadn't accepted his call to ministry. He just did his trial sermon a couple of weeks ago. I was so excited. Yeah, I was really excited. I'm ready to shift the role. So so but I think also him being exposed to his mom as a woman pastor kind of gave him a different level of understanding when I stepped into the role. So yeah, that's interesting. How far back and how different the lineage is. So what was so Glenn, for you, what was Leofric, what is the expectation of succession? So Glenn, I know that you are pastoring you were called to not to a different church. Does the church your father founded, is that church still in existence?
Yeah, so how that even it's strange because once again, I didn't want to have anything to do with ministry. I actually, like I said, what how I ended up back in Jacksonville, that I was in the military. I was in the Air Force. I was in the Air National Guard, and I always tell people I started the war because in 2003 January, the Africa, I had left Cookman, but I was at DBCC sitting in the class, and they called from the base that said, "Hey, you got you need to come home." And I'm like, for what? They were like, man, y'all, we going overseas. We going to war. And I'm like, no, I'm in the National Guard. I don't do that. I don't have nothing to do with that. But January of that same year, I prayed, Lord, if you allow me to go overseas, I'll come back home and do right.
Oh.
And so, and what's funny is that I had never experienced spring break really in Daytona, quote unquote, outside the dorm. You know, my freshman year I didn't have a car, so now all my homeboys, we all us in Daytona. I'm living on Beach Street in Daytona. I'm like ready. I got my car ready, hooked up, and boom, go overseas. And when I come back home, my dad, we always talked around the barbecue grill, and he said, "You know what the Lord called you to do, son?" And I said, "The Lord ain't told you nothing, brother. The Lord ain't told you nothing." And he said, "Yeah, yeah, man. I know what the Lord said, man. Lord, I know what He told you." And yeah, I preached my first sermon on my parents' back porch, getting back to the basics. And but it still was no expectation. It was, hey, you preach your one little sermon, and it will go months before I ever preach again. And one business meeting, them business meetings always something funny happened. He stood up at the meeting, he said, if I ever sit down or whatever may happen to me, my son would take over. And I'm like, who? Like, son, like, bro, not like, I like running the sound, help out with praise and worship, but I ain't trying to, you know. But he ended up. So long story short, he ended up getting sick, and I started preaching and literally started pastoring, all doing everything. But with how I transitioned to Zion Hope is really Pastor Torian Daly. Torian Daly, when he left to go to Atlanta, I called him and I said, "Man, you leaving your dad's church?" He said, "Glenn, that's the problem. That ain't my dad's church." And so that right there allowed me to move on in the process of Zion Hope. And the church no longer, my dad actually, before he passed, preached my installation service. But then he said, "You know what, son, my health ain't great." He brought the entire church over. So we actually own the building, but Resurrection basically combined with Zion Hope. So, but the succession plan was he put it in the bylaws that if he ever passed away, I was still there, or if he ever stepped down, that I would lead the ministry. And he actually allowed me to operate in that. So after we went through all that turmoil, man, it was just really great times. It was an amazing time of sitting in the pulpit with him. He allowed me to grow. I made a lot of mistakes, and he still encouraged me. So yeah, our succession. So leaving the Go Design Hope was hard, because I felt I was leaving everywhere I grew up at, in ministry. But yeah, he came over that September. Came over that September, and he said, "Yeah, man, I'm going to join it. Be in ministry with you. Let's do it." And so that's that goes back to pain. That's the pain that now that after I preach on Sunday, I can't look to the right to say, "Man, how was that today?" But that's our succession plan. I wasn't looking for it, but this is how it ended. Yeah.
What about you, Leofric?
Well, the good thing about me is we don't have a succession plan for me yet. I can honestly say, I hope I hope the man goes for a little bit longer. But the thing about it is, for us, is that I honestly can say my sister will probably get called to preach before I will. I'm I think years ago, um I noticed that my heart was for people, but my way of doing ministry was different. I was good with youth. I was good working my way around the city and certain government entities and things of that nature, which is now what I'm working in and doing things in as my day job. But that's also how I do my ministry as well. And God gave me a different call. Starting my nonprofit was a total divine, and I tell people, when I was starting my nonprofit, that was a total divine thing. Like, that hadn't I wasn't thinking about doing nonprofit work. I wasn't thinking about dealing with no kids. I literally had a job offer from the FBI. They called me on my birthday and
Wow.
said, "Hey man, you got 48 hours to accept this job or taking it off the table." And literally, God had been giving me dreams that whole week to start a nonprofit. And that's how it started off. Um I gave my first sermon because of that nonprofit. Like, it's nobody heard it. It wasn't taped, and I thank God. But literally, I got invited to do a sermon at a church here in Jacksonville. Like, I can't remember the name of it. That was so many years ago. But because of that, because of my nonprofit, and somebody referred me to give a sermon, and I gave my first sermon, and literally, I think two of my mentors who worked in my nonprofit heard it. But I think the beautiful thing is, Bishop AJ Wright out of West Palm Beach, a few years ago during COVID, and literally, I was everybody had stopped going and coming to church, of course, we're literally kind of shut our doors for the first few weeks of it. And Bishop AJ Wright came from West Palm Beach, and we were and since I was a kid, I've always liked sitting in the pastor's office when we got a guest pastor. I'm sitting back to him, chill with him, and you ain't kicking me out. If anybody leaving, it's everybody else, but I'm staying right here. So that was always me. So pastors have always felt comfortable, talking around me. And he looked at me, we were talking about game planning for this thing, and he said, "LJ, you have to be the eyes and the ears for your dad." And I think I was what, 25, 24, 25 around this time. And I'm sitting, I'm not understanding what he means. He said, "Man, Joel Osteen was the cameraman, the video guy at his father's church." And but at the end of the day, Joel was able to step into everything just by simply watching and knowing how everything goes. And like I said, I don't know if I'm called to be to preach or to lead Open Arms in the future. Me and my father sit and talk about who the next pastor may be if he plans to step down earlier than what he expects. I've never looked at it as being me. But every Sunday, every day, me and my father talk, and we talk about regular stuff, football and all the other stuff. But if we had to talk about the church, he takes my word for some things, because he knows I'm looking out, and I'm hearing, or I'm watching, and what can be better. We just installed a whole state of the art camera, video system, everything, and off my word, and because of what I feel like is best for the church and things of that nature. So it's good that I have his ear. It's good that I'm able to he's able to take my word for things that advance the ministry. And I joke with him all the time. I say, hey man, you got the worst person running your streaming. I say, if you make me too mad, ain't nobody gonna see service. So I said, so you better treat me nice, because
Yeah,
can't nobody get it back on if I shut it down. But no, that I think I think my ministry has literally been just that, being his right hand man in a lot of things, and having his ear, and having his word on a few things. And that's why I was saying they were trying to get those cameras pushed through for years before I said let's do it. But that showed that he trusted the word of his son versus some other things. And not to downplay what they were saying, but once I came to him and said, hey, this is what we need to get, he was like, all right, let's get it.
yeah,
And so that meant a lot for me, to know that he's trusting me in a lot of things that's going on in the ministry that he may not see, but that his son is taking things. So he sees I'm invested in the ministry, invested in church, invested in the people, and we've been able to make things work like that. So I'm happy about that.
yeah. I didn't want it. I'm gonna tell you why I didn't want when my dad said something to me about it. Because during that time, and I don't know, LG, we just had all of these bishop. I mean, well, pastor son teams.
Yeah.
It was all these pastor son teams, and I'm looking, and trust me, because I've been in church all my life, but haven't always been in the back room. You know, my like I said, my father allowed me to play sports, hang out, and all those type of things. And I'm looking at him like, man, bro, I don't need that.
Yeah.
I don't need the
Yeah.
pulpit. I don't need the
Yeah.
church. I don't need none of those things to make me feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, the culinary world was my everything.
Mm-hmm.
I was running restaurants. I could less about church. And when he said something to me about it, I'm like, man, you just trying to be like the rest of these guys, and
Mm-hmm.
half of them dudes ain't right as it is. That ain't my, but his father son team stuff, man, it just seemed like it kept popping up around. And I only can speak for Jacksonville, but it seemed like in Jacksonville it was just popping up real big. I mean, you like, hey man, you a preacher now? Like, bro, you pastoring? Yeah, man, my dad, like, bro, you was just okay, no problem, man. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's one reason that, and I just didn't want to I didn't even want nothing to do with it. But yeah, it was beautiful to being able to just doing what you was doing, man. I was just assisting my dad, remodeling the church, doing some things, stuff come up, like, hey, pops, man, I think we need to be careful with this. Don't do that. I remember I tried to tell my dad the start of a 501c3. Man, he took them papers and closed that folder and was like, hey man, get out my face with that stuff. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I know for me, and I was sharing this just this week. Like my children are not members of my ministry. Um they all go to a different church. So I've never, since I've been pastoring, put that pressure on them, um, that you need to be a part of what I'm doing. One, my boys are musicians. So I definitely believe that musicians are worthy of what they require. But my vow is I'm not going to go broke paying musicians. So you stay over there where them people can afford to pay you. And we'll say by trikes till Jesus come back. And then and my daughter, she and they all are in ministry. And for me, that's what's most important. Because regardless to what we as a family went through, they remained in church.
Mhm.
I remember when I backslid, when I decided that I didn't like church people and I didn't want nothing to do with church. I never stopped my kids from going, and I would literally get up to drop them off for 8 o'clock service, and be like, "Hey, y'all call me when y'all ready to go home." And they call me, and I go and I pull up and be like, "Come on, let's go." I never, even though I was hurt, I walked away. I never stopped them from going. And so it has, and even now they're all still doing something in ministry. Even my oldest son, he was in the military and he was stationed in Tennessee. He found a church in Tennessee to play the drums for, so on a Sunday morning they are somewhere in church. And I think for me that's most important, than for me to be the one. I, I'm I want you to go where you called to be, because not to say there may not be a time when they are with me.
Mhm.
I just may not be the voice for them right now.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I need you to be where what feeds you.
And I think that's important now. So you see, for me, when I left and went to college, I didn't go to nobody's church. I, I watched my church back, and it was so weird because I hated attention. I just wanted to be regular, and when I went to Cookman, I had all these pastors. Hey, I know your daddy. Come to my church. I never forget. I was in Walmart getting groceries, and man, I was picking out a dollar steakum. They served the four little steakums for $1, and great value. And a pastor said, "Hey, little Leofric." I look over. I said, "Well, who am I back in Jacksonville? Like, who calling me? Who calling me that?" And it was a pastor. He said, "Man, I ain't seen you in church yet." And I said, "You probably won't." And I called my dad right after that. I said, "Man, I told him, I said," and I was like, "Man, don't have these people doing that." Because from that point, I said, "I ain't going nobody. I watch my church back home." Because I said, if I come, I want to come on my own, but don't you got to give me that time to get away from what I'm used to. And I visited, I think, a few churches when I became an alpha. And we did alpha day at churches, or
Mhm.
church with the alphas and stuff. And I was like, and most of them churches, I'm like, I see why I ain't came yet. And I said it. This wasn't for me. But see, now growing, I listen to multiple pastors every Sunday. I work in ministry at my own church, but I'm surfing, and thank God that is that way, because I get a bunch of different messages and nuggets, and it's good because Zion Hope is one of the churches I listen to. I
Yeah.
go all across the north side, Zion Hope, Abyssinia. Listen, I go across them all just to get a different word. St. Paul, I go across them all because it's good to hear a different word that could feed you. And I thank God for the streaming purposes, because you can get that now. You can get that now. And you ain't got to leave your church, but you can definitely get a good word from multiple platforms. So I think that's very important. Unfortunately, I can't relate because I didn't go to nobody church when I did leave Jacksonville for a few years. But
Man, I used to walk to Allen Chapel. I used to walk to Allen Chapel AME, and I said, "I'm a
yeah,
Baptist. What am I doing in there?" I used to walk to Allen Chapel from the dorms. I used to go because it seemed like everybody went to Allen Chapel, and I would
yeah,
walk there to
yeah.
Allen Chapel. And I would get up every Sunday religiously. And my roommates used to be like, "Bro, where you going? Like, we just been out all night. Where you going?" Like, "Bro, I'm going to church." Like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to church. But something you said, now that I have teenage kids, I kind of see church differently for them.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I have, I mean, now that we my kids didn't understand the Baptist world anyway, because growing up, all they knew was their granddad's church.
Mhm.
So it was kind of like, "Hey, y'all, we finna go to this new church. Hey, like, hey, I need y'all to kind of be on your game for right now, till we kind of get in our little comfort." But I told them, I was like, "Listen, my kids are active in sports. My kids are active, period. Especially now that my son going into the 11th grade, he going to camps and college visits. Like, hey, If your expectation is for my children to be here and all that type of thing, that's not gonna happen. So that's a part of the expectation for me to be your pastor. Then I'm gonna tell you now, my children are not gonna be here. And I purposely want it to be that way because I don't want them to grow up and just start hating church.
Yes.
Because I remember during COVID when my dad was like, "Hey, we need to start going back to the church, but we'll do it outside." And one day, my son, he was about 14, he looked at me with that look in his eye, Leofric, like, "Man, I'm sick of this crap. I'm sick of putting up tents. I'm sick of pulling out equipment." And he even said it. This my granddaddy church. He don't help do nothing. Like, hey. So now being in Zion Hope, man, they love it. They actually love it. They actually grew up there from being little kids. Oh my God, man! Because there's one lady, she gives my son Florida State stuff. If it ain't every Sunday, if she know he got a camp or something, the ladies at the church take care of them. But that's something I feel that for me now to having teenage kids, I want them to understand what ministry looks like. I want them to understand what God looks like to them, what prayer looks like to them, because pastors have to be careful of promoting something, that, hey, on Sunday I'm this, but
Mhm.
on Monday through Friday I'm this.
Yeah.
So my children know, like, man, my dad crazy in the pulpit, he crazy at the house, to the point where even the high school, my son, like for me growing up, like, man, we ain't going to your house, Glenn. Your daddy be in there praying and we're not going to your house. Like, but the kids like coming over here because at the end of the day, they know, hey man, get on the PlayStation. Now, you got to watch your mouth. Y'all in there TikToking. I know y'all in there on the phone with other girls and all that type of stuff, but it's a environment where the kids can feel comfortable to come and
Yeah.
where don't feel the stress and strain of, I got to be perfect in church. You know,
Mhm.
that's a blessing. That's one thing that I really have been blessed with, that my children enjoy actually being in ministry. Not like, we got to go again. We got to go again. And so
Mhm.
And I think that's important because I see that as how I was with my dad. Like we were trying to make it as regular as possible. The same person I saw on Sundays was literally the same person at home. I mean, if he was, I mean, it's better now. He was a little bit more strict back then because you're raising a boy.
yeah,
but growing up, I mean, literally when I got to college, that became my best friend. Literally, when I moved away and we got literally so close. And even now, my line brothers in my fraternity, when they come to Jacksonville, they got to. It's like, hey man, what Pop said. I'm like, well, God dog, like you pledged with me. Like, what's going on? Nah, man, I got to see Pops. I'm like, well, okay. Well, we all going to church. We can't see him at the house. We gonna come to church. Like it's crazy how. But the thing is, he's always literally since I was just telling my mother the other day how he's made it like we have not had to worry about. We do ministry because we want to do ministry, not because we're forced to it. Because we the standard has always been, hey, the Thomas children gonna be regular. I got in trouble and I didn't see it no different way. Okay, cool, whatever. I got in church. I got in trouble. I did this. I did that. And even to this day, you got and it pays dividends. If that's one thing I could say, to your kids, Glenn, or your son, Glenn, is it pays dividends. I mean, I just had a baby girl 3 months ago, and man, you talking about the love and the showering of gifts you get when those people see you grow up in church, and now hey, able to contribute to certain things, like you said, giving shirts and stuff and camps, and man, they stay updated with your whole life, what you got going on, and I've never had so much money put in my hand off a secret handshake and
Why?
man,
yes,
I've never had so much stuff of that in my life, man. And it pays dividends just to be, as my father said, respectful to people, loving to
Yeah.
people. And because they gonna see your heart, that you serve God and you serve people, and that's what we were put here to do. And like I said, I think that's what drove me into my calling is working with in nonprofit, is to do that. So I just think it was different. And I think that's a big thing that pastors have to do now, growing up with kids, so that they don't hate the church. Is to let the church know that hey, let my kids are just like your kids,
yeah,
Mhm.
and they're gonna get in trouble. They're gonna do things. They're gonna be mischievous. They're gonna do all that stuff. But let them be kids. And I think that's the biggest thing that I tell people all the time. I love being a PK. I ain't had no trouble. I'm
Hmm.
all right. I was good
Yeah.
because my parents let it be known from the jump. Hey, that's Leofric. That's who he is. That's LJ. That's who he is. And it's either you take it or you leave it, pretty much. But he go home with us. So so I mean it's simple. Like I said, the people want to get me in trouble all the time. I had so many people want to tell them just to see what they're gonna do to LJ, and most of them never got the pleasure to see it because my parents already told them, hey, we want them to be kids.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, uh, have you had that desire to just be regular?
Well, for me, I just I've like I say been around pastors and preachers and watch pastors and their sons and their children, and they used to just try and build this world, whether it's the cars, whether it's where they lived, whether what they did, you know, and and for me, my dad would tell you all the time, like, hey man, your daddy a lot of times, whatever they say in the streets about me is probably true. So,
Yeah.
hey, he'll tell you, man, I graduated from the first 4 year of Rains High School in '69, so you already know. But one thing my dad did growing up, he took us places. He talked to us. He told us. He let us know, like, hey, man, I'm pastoring, but I ain't perfect. And that's that's what I felt like growing up. A lot of times, people just wasn't authentic. They just weren't able to be free. They
Yeah.
wasn't able to be themselves. They, like you said, I done got kicked out of basketball games because I'm cussing people out. I mean, cussing them out, and cussing the referees. And my dad would be like, hey, football, I'm aggressive, I'm talking trash. And it wasn't like, oh, that's that you the pastor son. My dad looking like it's football. I don't care about that. Like that. And now it's even worse than me, like because I coach and because it was it was recently a basketball game, middle school game, and I know I was cutting up. And after the game, we ended up losing. After the game, a lady say, Pastor Foreman. I'm like, oh Lord. I say, yes, ma'am. No, she said, aren't you Pastor Foreman? I'm like, God doggone Zion Hope done got too many people know who I am. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, oh, it's just so good to see you. I was like, you was in the game? She was like, yeah. I was like, oh, okay. Like, but at the end of the day, people know that that's who I am, and I wanted my children to just be them. I know for a fact my son, I done watched him on the football field. I done seen him like, hey man, you gotta watch your mouth, bro. Like you son, man, that my son. You can't, And now that my daughter's a cheerleader, that's a whole nother world of just drama. But I just at the end of the day, and I preach and I tell people, man, just be you. Because at the end of the day, God don't care about your title. God don't care about your position. He just want authentic you.
Yeah.
And I feel like if pastors just be authentic, man, yeah, it's some stuff you gotta, keep. That's anybody keep from the public. Me and my wife, I love her dearly. Do we get along every day? No. Do my kids sometimes drive me crazy? Sure. But at the end of the day, you still have to be you. People should never be able to feel like you're one way in ministry and another way in the streets. And I
Mhm.
feel that has killed the testimony of so many pastors and
Yes.
and preachers throughout the years because we come back around to say these words. Well, he's just a man. No, at the end of the day, if you just be authentic from the jump, yeah, you got sin, you got trouble, some stuff you shouldn't be involved in. But at the end of the day, people should be able to know that, man, what I see on Sunday, I can get on Monday. So, yeah, Glenn is just who I am, man. I'm fun, crazy. You know, half the time people even say, "Man, you don't wear suits in Zion Hope." Like Zion Hope knew what they was getting when I met with him. I told him, man, like, hey, I'm a tennis shoe, jeans, t-shirt wearing guy. First Sunday, I get it. You'll get my communion wear, but nah, I just gonna be authentic and be Glenn. Yeah.
Yep. I know for I think that was my biggest struggle with accepting my call. Being afraid that I can't be me. Because like in my first marriage, like I lived a lie for 19 years.
Wow.
Like y'all know the picture of the family on the fan?
Mm,
Like to people that was us, you know. And then when there was such a great fall, it hurt a lot of people. Um, I had one person to say, it didn't seem that bad. And I said, it's because I didn't let you see how
mm,
bad it was. I covered a lot of things. I hid a lot of things. I wasn't able to really just say I'm not okay when I wasn't okay. I suffered from depression. I spired in my weight from being depressed. When there were times that my ex-husband was having inward struggles, it was like the church didn't see that. All they saw was his gift, and that was what we were. Like our call was to build churches. So we would go in new churches and we would build them, like establishing order, putting things in place. But when when we failed it hurt a lot of people because we lied so well.
Wow.
And even people who kind of had inside view of what things really were was like, why you left? I'm like, you act like you went there. Like you saw the stuff. You saw the stuff I was going through. You going through the same thing. Why you ain't left? That was my question.
yeah.
But hindsight, I think it was what we set up for people. Like we set up an expectation. And another preacher asked me, he was like, so why did you stay so long? Because we were married for 19 years. He said, why did you stay so long? And I told him, because church people told me I was supposed to.
Mm.
That concludes another episode of Church Rehab Podcast. We upload new episode every first and third Friday of the month. Come back so you can hear the conclusion of the interview with Glenn Foreman Jr. and Leofric Thomas Jr. I am your host, Pastor Mechelle Canady. Make sure you like and follow the podcast to receive notification whenever a new episode is released. Thank you, and remember, it's your time to thrive.